Well, welcome everyone to our second WestGrid Town Hall. I'm Patrick Mann. I'm the Director of Operations for WestGrid. And in this time, we're in the transition from our old legacy systems to all these wonderful new systems. We've figured we should have these continuing series of essentially information sessions to keep everybody up to date and tell them where our thinking is going and how the whole thing is working. Can I have the next slide here? Yeah. So in this talk, we're continuing from what we did back a month and a half ago or so with the original town hall. I'll talk a bit more about the tech refresh, the migration plans, and some stuff about the resource allocation competition. Again, to bring everybody up to date on where we've got, mostly from the Compute Canada point of view, but of course we're doing this from a WestGrid standpoint. You can, in this talk, email questions to info, or if you want to, you can just use the video chat feature to send out questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go along in the discussion. I should note that we're still, or at least Compute Canada is still working on all the details of these things. So I'm going to give you some of the latest stuff that I know, but much of it is still in discussion. And I think while the broad outlines are already there, some of the details will still change as we move along. One or two of the things, in fact, I only updated last night. So lots of changes still happening, and be warned that things might still change a bit from what I'm going to present. So to start off, a bit of a review then. Remember that we got these new machines. Here's a list of what I know of as the current deployment. So GP1, remember, that's the cloud system at UVic. The purchase orders are out for that, and we're expecting delivery at University of Victoria of a whole bunch of new cloud nodes sometime this week, next week I think, and then configuration and testing the week after. So we're still kind of aiming for August 30th, although I suspect it might be the first week in September. The plan for those cloud nodes is just to add them to the existing west.cloud. So that's a pretty straightforward operation. GP2 and GP3 are the two big new general purpose machines, one at SFU in Vancouver and one at Waterloo. GP2 is going ahead with GP3. We're waiting to see how the GP2 RFP does before putting out the GP3 RFP itself. So GP2 is the big one that we want to get up and running as quickly as possible and start moving users onto it. When we've done a lot of the sort of detailed planning and seeing what needs to be done with GP2, and essentially how much work there is in configuring, getting the software stack up and running, all those kinds of things, we figure now maybe February 2017, might be a bit earlier, so that's delayed from the initial estimates, which were more late autumn of this year. So the first big machine, separate, that's a cluster, general purpose, just early in the new year, and then GP3, May is still the time for that one. The NSI is the National Storage Infrastructure. The RFP process is complete for that. We've chosen the vendors. There will be an official formal announcement shortly. I just heard yesterday that the disk storage purchase orders for SFU have been signed and are sent out, and that the tape units at SFU have been received and are being installed. So we'll have big tape backup systems at SFU for that, and the new big, probably 10 petabyte disk storage system, 7 petabytes, something in there, will be available at SFU, and we're really hoping that will be available in mid-September. And we'll talk quite a bit more about that system and getting stuff off silo later on in the talk. The network RFP is in review. Eventually, we want 100 gigabit to all the sites, but we're expecting to get some of the big new network switches in September. That's not quite so urgent since we already have switches there, and it'll depend on what we see as usage and such as to when we actually go to 100 gigabit across all of Canada. But I think SFU will probably go first. Things like the parallel file system, that RFP is still in development. That's critical, of course, for the cluster, but they're pretty standard. Similarly with the scheduler, the RFP is in preparation, and we're expecting later on in the autumn. And LP1, remember, that's the large parallel system that will have one single great big, maybe 60,000 core system sitting at the University of Toronto. Early discussion for that one. We're waiting for that one to see about the latest Intel chips. These were recommendations from some of the review committees was to wait for a while because of the new technologies that are supposed to be appearing. So there's our current status. To remind you again of the decommissioning and some of the slight updates there. Hungerby and Jasper in Edmonton are scheduled for decommissioning at the end of this year. And again, I'll have a little bit more to say about that because we've got a slight problem that we're losing some significant capacity at the end of December, but GP2 only comes in February. Calgary, heading for March 31st of next year. UBC, Orsinus, March 31st. Victoria, March 31st. And then Drex and Bugaboo will keep going for a bit longer after that. You can see that we're really trying to get everything up to March 31st. And I'll have more to say about that on the rack. But the key thing there is that the research allocation competition process is being extended to a new period, which will be sort of beginning of April to end of March. Remember, right now it's end of December, beginning of January to the end of December of the calendar year. So that's being extended, so we'll just keep the existing rack going until March 31st, and therefore trying to keep as many of the old machines going right up to that period. There are similar tables for all the other systems in Compute Canada, and you can go to the Compute Canada website if you want to see all the gory details there. Storage decommissioning, I had this slide in the previous town hall. I just want to note the two key things there. Right at the top, Silo, that's the big one, about a 3 petabyte system, long-term storage. It's scheduled for decommissioning at the end of this year, and that's the urgent need to get all of Silo's data off Silo and onto the new SFU National Storage Infrastructure during the autumn. Bugaboo is right down at the bottom. That's the other long-term storage system, so there'll be we'll have to begin worrying about that one, but probably not until next year. And then the others are all local storage systems, and they'll, of course, go down when the systems get decommissioned. And we'll be talking about those with beginning instructions later on. So next slide. Right. So as mentioned, Silo is the real big immediate issue that we really have to cope with. And I'm pleased to introduce Sergei Stepanenko. He's the WestGrid site lead at the University of Saskatchewan, where Silo is in Saskatoon. He and the team in Saskatoon are the ones who have been keeping some of that quite ancient old Silo hardware going, working with all the users, really taking the load of keeping everything going, and now taking the lead on the Silo migration. Sergey, you can raise your hand and...
Hello, everybody.
So go ahead.
Okay. So my portion of the presentation will cover essentially our plan for data migration and user migration from Silo to new storage platform. So, we designated 3 group of users that different in first their data usage and second in their migration process. So general users would be majority of WestGrid users that have data on silo. This group will be migrated by WestGrid staff here in University of Saskatchewan, and they will have a specific schedule designed to make a transition as seamless as possible for general users. Second group would be large group of users with significant amount of data on silo that use silo as a backup copy of their original file systems or research data. And these users, first of all, might have a golden copy of their data somewhere else, not on silo, and therefore can migrate data from that copy directly to new storage system, and also can consider migrating their data directly to tape, not to spinning media, which will significantly reduce the load on the storage in the future. Also, consideration is since they already have their data somewhere else, their migration pattern can be separate from general users, because they can migrate their data anytime during the migration process, even close to silo decommissioning. And there's a third group of users that we identified that are dedicated as research projects like Atlas, CANFAR, SuperDARN, and others that will be dealt on individual cases, because although we migrate data or they migrate data on their own, there's a hardware involved in the migration, and the volume of the data is too large to put them into first or second category. So next slide, please. So for general user migration, there is a schedule that we hope to adhere to. So somewhere mid-September, when a new storage platform will be commissioned for use, we will issue first notification outlining basically what storage platform is, how to access it, and initiate the countdown for the migration. And then when specific time comes for the group of users or individual users for migration, normally will be 1 to 2 weeks prior to a migration start. We will issue notification for specific users or group of users that their data will be migrated, and time frame for migration will be specified. During this migration window, data for those users and group of users will be locked out for access. So meaning that users that will be migrated cannot access their data on silo for reading or writing. Upon completion of migration, users will be available will be able to access data on new storage platform. So that pattern will repeat until all general users will be migrated. Next slide, please. So for general users, there's nothing required of users for the migration except cooperation in our schedule, meaning that if we determine that migration window will be 4 days or 5 days or 7 days, that window, that data will not be available to users. Not all users, but specific group of users that's scheduled for that particular window. So that entire period between mid-September and December 31st will include all users segregated in groups. So we minimize unavailability of data to only small group of people and to very short period of time, which we determine right now between 4 to 7 days. Therefore, we encourage all users to arrange their data access and their pattern of operations as soon as they receive our final notification for migration 1 to 2 weeks prior to migration window, and then we will log their data and migrate it to a new facility. As soon as data migrated and verified, access to it will be restored for users, which we will notify by email, and along with documentation that will explain method of accessing data and other technical details. It should not be a very significant difference from current method of operation with Silo. There is a dedicated support channel for migration process that can address all concerns and issues during the migration. So I think that will cover the migration.
Yeah, thanks, Sergey. So yeah, just to emphasize, yeah, that this is our big urgent thing, and say Sergey is really taking the lead on that and developing the plan. And as Sergey mentioned, we'll have support available and a lot of detailed documentation going up soon. I will very briefly just talk about the compute migration. So I've already noted that the actual rack allocations for 2016, that's the ones you're using right now, they're going to be continued to well, March 31st to 2017, but you know there's usually a week in there where we do the transition. So everything except Jasper and Hungary will keep going under the same allocations that you've got now to the end of March. GP2 should become available in February, and that gives us a bit of an overlap period. So we're still working on a lot of those kinds of details, mostly because we just haven't got GP2 available for testing yet. But hopefully we'll be able to give users some beta initial access, and you can start thinking about migrating codes and such. I think one of the keys is, of course, the software and application stack that you'll be able to use on GP2. A quite extensive effort is being made to understand all the applications that are available in Compute Canada systems, that's across Canada, and trying to develop a well-defined and comprehensive application stack for GP2 and, of course, GP3 and LP1 in the future. An issue there is that one really needs to have GP2 online for the testing. So we can expect, I hope, documentation and some details further on towards December when GP2 is available for all the systems and analyst guys. I should just note that I think it's the Research Support National Team which is working on that. Maxime, are you there? Is Maxime there? Maxime is from Calcutta, Quebec, and is the lead of the Research Support National Team. I thought I saw him on the list. Anyhow, they're working away on that, and say we really hope to get a lot of those details as early as possible. You can go to the Compute Canada website for, at the moment, the high-level details. There is also a documentation wiki under development, which will have all the instructions. Yeah, one or two other little details, of course. In my first slide, I think the scheduling RFP is still going out to see what kind of scheduler we get with the new systems. From the point of view of the user, that might mean that job scripts have to be changed or modified for job submission. The basic approaches will be the same with a fair share prioritized approach. But yeah, we'll have as much of the details around that one. And again, have to wait until we know what scheduler we're going to have. Okay, Hunger and Jasper. So these are the two that are scheduled for December 31st deactivation. GP2 only available in February. So we're working on this one. Of course, Hunger and Jasper rack holders will have the highest priority for migration to GP2. We'll get those off as soon as possible. And we're working on some fallback plans. That might include things like provide resources on other legacy systems. We're kind of swamped, so that's a tough one. But we may be able to find some space. Other regions may have some new resources. We're exploring that one. And of course, we will have the GP1 cloud, and maybe we can use some of those nodes. So we're working on that one just in the last few weeks and trying to figure out how we're going to approach this. So I'll be meeting with the University of Alberta folks, I think the week after next, something to look at some of the detailed plans, and we'll get back to you on those issues. Final point there, I didn't know if this was clear, but Hunger itself is not being replaced. And Hunger is that very large shared memory system, SGI UV1000, and we will not have such a system to move users to. So we'll have to work with some of the very large memory users, and we'll be contacting them directly. Of course, if you feel you have a real problem with not having Hunger, then feel free to contact me directly. I note that the best I think we're going to be able to do is that GP2 will have 3 terabyte nodes with 24 cores. Some of the details still to be worked out there, but something like that, which will be the best we have in the way of large RAM systems. So that's certainly one of the identified issues. Now off to resource allocation. The quite significant changes are being made to the resource allocation process. In fact, I see Eduardo there, who is the Compute Canada project manager in charge of resource allocation, and is busily trying to make all the right decisions as soon as possible so that we know exactly what we're doing with the resource allocation process. We're not quite there yet, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I think you all saw that there was an announcement that went out last week from Compute Canada. What I'm going to do here is give you the latest understanding that I have, and that's kind of up to last night. There were changes last night. And so we're still working on it, but I think the overall approach is about right. So this has been rather restructured. That was due to all the Compute Canada user surveys, the Spark planning process, lots of comments from the previous cycle, and by retrospectives completed with the science review committees, with the chairs of those committees. So a lot of input from users went into this. And key issues, for instance, were that the old resource allocation process insisted that a very large major proposal be made every year. And that was a problem, especially for smaller asks. And then the research platforms and what's RPP? Platforms and programs competition was a little bit of an ad hoc one that we introduced to look at clouds and that kind of approach, and that wasn't very well defined. So the changes now, first off, the old RAC is now called Resources for Research Groups, called RRG. So what we used to call the RAC is the RRG. RAC itself is now the generic term for the whole works. Each of the research platforms and portals and the RRG will have 2 application streams. I'll give some details of that. The old default system is being rejigged, and it's being called a rapid access service. I won't say too much about that because I think we're still working on some of the details there, and it's a little premature. And then the allocation period has been changed from April 1st to March 31st. So next slide. So here's a brief summary, again, of what I think is current up to last night, but for change. So the research platforms and portals, that's that long-term one, up to 3 years, usually focused on cloud platforms and portals. There will be two streams. There's a service portal stream, and that's more or less aimed at web servers. So relatively straightforward, simple web systems where you build your web server, maybe a database or something in the background. There'll be a bit of a streamlined review process on that one. So it's not a major ask. So we'll cut that one down as much as possible. Then the compute and storage platform one, those are major platforms, and we have quite a number of those. Examples might be the astronomy CANFAR operation, where there's a lot of data, there's compute involved with the whole works, and that will undertake a full review process. That's the thing I was just trying to get straight with Eduardo last night. Thanks, Eduardo. And so that still might have some changes on the details. The resources for research groups, that's our usual annual competition, generally focused on classic job-based compute, so running jobs on GP2. And to reflect the input we got from users, there are now two streams. There's a regular stream, which will be a simplified application form, much shorter, where you can just say we want some smaller amounts, and off you go. And then for those who really want the thousands of core years, those ones, it will be the same as last year. It will be a rather complete full proposal process. And then the Rapid Access Service, RAS, and we're waiting for a few more details from Compute Canada. Next slide. Yeah, I just thought I'd kind of give you some hints as to where we're thinking on the way of the RRG stream boundaries, that when we talk about large as compared to the regular streamlined process, maybe a couple of thousand core years, over a petabyte, and a large number, 500 of cloud vCPUs, or virtual CPUs, for instance. And for GPUs, anything under about 200 GPU years. So we'll be defining this when you see the announcements coming out, exactly what it is. But it'll be somewhere around here. And I think that means that the majority of proposals will fit in regular, and we'll have a rather more streamlined process for their proposals, which I really hope will cut down on the effort required quite a lot. Okay, so there we are, overview of the rack stuff. Here are the timelines. The RPP, if you recall, has a notice of intent submission, and that is supposed to be early September, but that really will be just the usual couple of paragraphs or a page. Then there will be a fast track, and I didn't mention that previously, but remember that we do ask if there have been minor changes in your last year's RRG, then we can just ask for a slight update and go in the fast track. But we'll invite people on that one. And then RRG and RPP, the full application, early October, due in mid-November, late November. Then we'll be doing our reviews over Christmas and later on into the new year. The announcement will be as early as we can, but certainly early March. And then the implementation, I've got mid-April there, but hopefully early-ish April when we get all those and can update all our priority scheduler configurations. So same kind of overall approach, but the key thing are the splits between RRG, RRP, the streaming, and the fact that we're going to the end of March. And as usual, I note that our WestGrid staff work with PIs quite a lot, and it's a really good idea to work with one of the WestGrid staff and revise your proposals. And in WestGrid, one of our strengths is that we have staff in most institutions, so you can get some local support from the staff. So I really recommend that. Let's see, cloud allocations. Let me just talk. I noted that the RRP is aimed at cloud folks, and there are some slight issues there. So the previous RRP did not have anything very specific about clouds. It was rather generic. remember we only introduced it 2 years ago. So having learned from usage, it's going to be a bit more formal now. You'll be able to ask for cloud resources and tell us what you want. And this is kind of my understanding right now, but there are 2 ways we've seen cloud usage appear. One is platforms and portals. And remember, there's going to be a streamed approach to the RRP for that. And that's kind of infrastructure as a service, where you get VMs and you get to do what you want with VMs. There's also the job-based ones, and the archetypal thing here is Atlas and the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC guys, who submit jobs to their very carefully and tailored VMs, and they can use VMs anywhere, whether it's on Amazon or on our stack or European stacks, whatever. So there's also this job-based approach. And we'll be working with both of them in the cloud application. I'm not exactly sure how that will all come out once we get the forms designed, but there'll be probably quite a technical review involved with those kinds of things, because we want to see what people are doing and how you're using the cloud. And of course, there'll be some kind of default application available with a small number of VMs. This one I put in just because it's one of those things that keeps coming up in conversation with our technical staff. And there are 2 parts here. One is that an infrastructure as a service, users manage their VMs. If you're a commercial operation, Amazon or Microsoft Azure, for instance, then if you screw up and somebody attacks or gets into your system, or you just do something wrong, well, that's your problem, and you pay for it because you pay per use. You pay for how many minutes the system's up and what it's doing. Of course, we don't do that. We are research-oriented and have the research, the rack process. And we've already had some issues where a user has not quite professionally locked down their systems. This, I should say, is kind of normal. We're expecting grad students, postdocs, and such to dive in and start to learn. So nobody is going to be a professional sysadmin all the time or right from scratch. So we are carefully monitoring the cloud, and we'll have some acceptable use policies around it. And so the final note is just one when you really do get into the cloud, be careful. And then the support end, yeah, we're learning too. We're learning how users use the cloud. We're learning what the platforms and portals look like. And WestGrid in particular, we're looking at how we can develop and train our staff to give good support for these new services, new strategies. Right now, we're kind of limited on our IAS support. If you want us to run your VM, well, fundamentally, we don't do that. It's still your problem to run your VM. However, we can start offering advice at the very least, and we're looking into where we want to go with that. Because, yeah, certainly if you've got a grad student who's not from a computer administration background, we'll have lots of problems trying to figure out what to do with an IAS service. And so especially in WestGrid, we're wondering how that's going to work. Let's see, I've just noticed a few questions. Yeah, maybe I'll answer those at the end. Yeah, we're almost at the end anyhow. So one here from the communications folks, and Aaron and Jana are on there, our fall training sessions. So there's a list of the training sessions that WestGrid is undertaking. More. We'll probably do another town hall at some point. Similarly, we're expecting to, because of our plans for WestGrid, next slide, then we're looking at where WestGrid is going to go within the whole Compute Canada umbrella, exploring things like incorporation, and of course we want to know what our users are doing. So I know you guys have all had various surveys and things coming out of Compute Canada at a more national level. We're interested much more at a regional level. So we'll be sending out a survey next week. It would be really great if you can fill in the survey and in particular think about those regional priorities. Hopefully it'll only be 10 or 15 minutes. And it might be a prize, all good stuff. So look forward to that coming out to our WestGrid users. And then this is an identical slide to the one I had last year, last town hall. Yeah, we are swamped right now in a big way. We're also trying to do all this new RFPs, getting the new services in, all that kind of stuff. It's clear to me that in fact, across Canada, people are stretched. So yeah, bear with us as we go along. We'll give you announcements, documentation as early as we can. But yeah, it's going to be quite a tough time for the next sort of 8 months, 6 months, maybe well into next summer, with both compute storage and, of course, we ourselves are trying to learn all about the new systems and such. Just one little, that second last bullet point, of course, on the old legacy systems, we are trying not to touch them, not to update them, not doing anything except absolute bare minimal security updates, for instance. Yeah, so if you do start asking for major new software packages, well, maybe we'll tell you to wait until we get GP2 going. Yeah, okay, and one more slide. Yeah, okay, so that's kind of the end of things. I can answer questions, and we've got a number of staff online. I sort of put up a list of things that we were trying to address during this talk, so I can, there's some questions, I won't address them here, but if you want anything more, just ask. And I see we had a couple of questions, I'll just look at that. ASNet Ross Dixon asked about GP2 having 3 terabyte nodes. Is that 3 nodes with 1 terabyte each? No, it's 1 node with 3 terabytes. I don't know exactly how many of those nodes we'll have, but certainly a few of them. So each of those nodes will have 3 terabytes. And then Paul Myers, what is the timeline for being approached by WestGrid Compute Canada staff about Jasper migration? Yes, very good question. Say I'm meeting with the U of A staff. There have been some vacations that have gotten away shortly. So I'm hoping we can get back to users later on in September. But ask me again in 2 weeks' time. Yes, what does it mean that current rack will be extended to April? Right. Okay, so yeah, maybe I wasn't 100% clear there. When we talk about a resource allocation, that gets translated to a priority. So you get a priority in the scheduling system. And our general approach is that if your use is continuous through a year, for instance, you have jobs in the queue pretty much all the time, then that priority translates to about how many core years you were actually given. Of course, if you don't use it for 6 months and then you start up, then you'd end up more or less with about half of what you were actually given. It's trying to distribute all the way around. So it's the priority that's the key thing that we configure into the scheduling systems. So that priority will continue going. So it's the priority that we just leave untouched for the 3 months, January to March. So if your usage is continuous across the whole 12 months, then your kind of average use per month will continue for January, February, and March. Does that make sense? Okay, no more questions there. Okay, that was the end of the questions that I see coming up at this point. Anything else? Feel free to get in touch with us. Support at westgrid.ca works as usual, and support is a generic one, so if it goes into our ticketing system, it'll get passed around. And similarly, if you want to contact me directly, there's my address, patrick.mann@westgrid.ca. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Thanks for attending, everyone.